Welcome to Ausgrave Royalty. I am Justin. Welcome to Dionysus, our last god and or goddess of the Bolen archetypes here, the archetypal gods and goddesses. Ooh, it's been a journey. Hope y'all have got something out of it. I also have a lot of notes on this one. Aphrodite was just ridiculous. I had way too many. That's what we did last time. Anyway, still stuff to get to. All right. Looking at my notes here. So the last god we covered was Hephaestus, which was what Bolen called one of the rejected sons, and as opposed to the favored sons, Apollo and Hermes before that. So Bolen calls Dionysus the ambivalently viewed son. The last god to join the Olympian pantheon, Dionysus was the son who changed Zeus from a distant father into a nurturing father. Dionysus is ambivalently viewed. Men in power react to Dionysus as a foreign influence that should not be allowed into the culture or into their psyches, while women and the feminine aspect of men are likely to welcome his influence. Men who are like this god find that others react to them with strong, ambivalent feelings, hardly ever indifferent. Bolen says Dionysus as god, archetype, and man was close to nature and to women. The mystical realm and the feminine world were familiar to him. He was often an unwelcome and disturbing element, a cause of conflict and madness in mythology, just as Dionysus can be in a man's psyche. The Dionysus archetype is a has powerful positive and negative potentialities. Stirring up the most ethereal and the basest of feelings, creating conflicts within the psyche and with society. It is an archetype that is present in some men who are mystics and in others who are murderers. In between, it is the archetype in men and women who experience ecstatic moments and intensely contradictory impulses. The divine child. One aspect to Dionysus is that his archetype carries with it the sense of specialness of person and of destiny. Just as a side note here, the divine child is also one of the names of the immature masculine archetypes Robert L. Moore and Douglas Gillette articulated in our last season, season 2 of King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. Not bad archetype, just not mature. The mature masculine archetypes being King, Warrior, Magician, Lover. The divine child is one of the precursor archetypes for children or immature archetypes. This is the energy that is difficult to keep imbalanced. If one is too identified with this, they'll become inflated. But if it's repressed, as it tends to be with men in the modern age, then they feel a sense of inauthenticity. I agree with Bolen here. From an early age, most men are encouraged to be human doings, not human beings. Just work, don't dream, right? And one note about, for those who might just be tuning in for the first time, Bolen is writing in like the 80s, sometimes earlier, even or to 90s era. So the generations kind of changed a lot. So she'll use terms like patriarchy or feminism, which meant something a little different than it does now, I would say. But I do agree with this. Even to this day, men typically get ground down, and that's the norm. And people are like, weird. He seems to be having a hard time in life when he's just been ground down the whole time. That's weird. Maybe men have problems. Interesting. I mean, our society is so checked out on men's issues that hence the rise of the manosphere as a pushback to the probably conscious attempt to put men down in more ways than one. Anyway, I have a video on the manosphere if you're interested in that. The eternal adolescent. Bolen asserts that Dionysus has a quality similar to Hermes in that there's a sense of staying in eternal youth when identified with this archetype. The Dionysian version of the archetypal adolescent is an intense and emotional person who becomes absorbed in whatever his or her current passion, forgetting the obligations, assignments, or appointments that he may have made. Consequently, he cannot seem to commit himself to work steadily toward achieving long-term goals, nor is he likely to make a commitment to an enduring relationship. Whenever I think of Dionysus, I think of Jack Sparrow from Pirates of the Caribbean. Just kind of clearly a genius, but very all over the place and very unreliable. But there's kind of a beauty to him because of what he's able to accomplish at the same time. And we talked about Zeus, right? I love the relationship Nietzsche had characterized the Apollonian and Dionysian, which is the creative and the destructive force of life and existence, and how, basically creativity results from their eternal conflict, which is kind of what we want. In the same way, like Zeus, I've jokingly, lovingly, affectionately called, he's the meta. He's the high-value man. He's the mainstream. He's the Joneses. He's like what society, the culture at the time says you should aspire to. And Dionysus is everything, is chaos. So like a bull in a china shop. And I like that when they collide, Zeus is transformed from an authoritarian into a nurturer. And that's the beauty of Dionysus. So the mother's son, Dionysus' mother died while he was still a fetus. Often men who are identified with this archetype also seem to be seeking an idealized woman who is both mother and lover, seeking unsuccessfully to find her in a series of relationships. This is especially true when there has been a physical or emotional separation between mother and son. Bolen articulates that this sort of predisposition could result in a man feeling associated with the maternal world, drawn towards the expression of the maternal instinct via an interest in domestic affairs or caretaking operations. Furthermore, she asserts that this energy can also result in a man who feels intimately related to women, who much prefers the company of women, who is a lover of women, merging with them in the ecstasy of lovemaking, and who intuitively understands women's experience. And I want to pause there and say that Moore and Gillette mentioned that it was Dr. Anthony Stevens from season 1 who said it's great to be able to identify with your contrasexual attributes, basically men identifying with their feminine, women identifying with their masculine, but it's unhealthy psychologically to make the contrasexual attribute the primary and develop it first before there's a good foundation in the local characteristics. Like basically you should learn boys should learn to become men before they learn about women and vice versa. Let me know in the comments what y'all think about that. Cultivating Dionysus. Many non-Dionysus men suffer from emotional aridness and are out of touch with their deeper emotions. Some lack sensuality or ecstasy, even if they have sex often. For them, cultivating Dionysus could be life-enhancing. The Dionysian focus is on the moment, not on a goal down the way. Very different from Apollo and Zeus. There is an openness to be moved by what happens between people or inside oneself in response to events. Whenever a man is aware of the clock, Dionysus is not present. Bolen encourages getting out of one's comfort zone to constellate this archetype. So, yeah, another comparison to King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, the Lover archetype, Warren Gillette said, the lover just wants to lick everything. Yeah, so this is like the classic story of the uptight so-and-so, and then the rowdy friend says, man, you need to lighten up, man. But the friend is like too much of a party person, and the rigid guy is too much of the rigid. But when they collide, they both end up learning something about the other person. I feel embarrassed that I can't think of a specific example, even though I've seen it 1,000 times in movies and such. Or I guess it's like in rom-coms too. The uptight female and the rowdy party guy, or vice versa. So let's see. Let's talk about some psychological difficulties. Bolen calls out that Dionysian individuals have the greatest potential for psychological difficulties. Only a man with a strong and healthy ego can appropriately restrain the archetype's influence and chooses how, when, with whom, and under what circumstances the Dionysian in him is lived out. Low self-esteem and inflation. Distortions in self-perception. Dionysians quickly receive messages from society that there is something wrong with them. This typically results in a chronic struggle of self-esteem, with low self-esteem. He often has trouble with identity because all of this criticism bumps up against a strong sense of being someone special. People around him are often affected in polarized ways. They either love him or hate him, rarely indifferent. And this, we've said this before, but anyone not that Zeus doesn't like, and remember, these are highly symbolic, right? So when we say Zeus, we don't mean the god Zeus from mythology. Well, we do mean that, but not merely that. We mean, in addition, the symbol. He's the meta. He's the mainstream of culture. Thus, if you are not in Zeus's favor, it's tantamount to saying you're not in mainstream society's favor, which could mean a lot of things. You're a skater, you're punk rock, you're iconoclast, you're a hermit, you're, a gamer, you're a weeb, you're a label, you're a conspiracy theorist, an incel. Like, there's all these terms, like, and when those groups fire back, they call the mainstream group NPCs or sheeple or whatever. So, like, yeah, basically Dionysus is one of these outsiders. There's a tendency towards hedonism and spontaneity, which can manifest in excessive partying and substance abuse problems, especially alcoholism. Let's not forget that Dionysus is a god of alcohol, which is also known as spirits, a substance which is often used in an attempt to experience something spiritual. And this reminds me of what Moore and Gillette characterized when they talked about liminal experiences and liminoid experiences. TLDR, liminoid experiences are like what Joseph Campbell calls the ordinary world. It's your day-to-day, you're on autopilot, but it can also range to exotic vacations. They can be highly enjoyable and new and novel and interesting, but they won't transform you deep down. Liminal experiences are those transformative experiences. They're those flashbulb memories, those moments you'll never forget that you could never be the same afterwards. And that's relates to alchemy and the cooking of the prima materia. If you're interested in any of that, I have a video on alchemy from season 1. But yeah, the point of bringing all that up was Warren Gillette, like, alcoholism, they say that alcoholism is an attempt to make the liminoid experience liminal, which is why, like, you get drunk and it's to simulate a liminal experience. It's to simulate ascension or transformation when it's really not. You're still in the liminoid trap. And not just with alcohol, but drugs, getting high, ascending, right? So, ways to grow. The psychological work that the Dionysian must do in order to grow is more complex than others because the archetype is more complex. And observing and accepting ego is needed. Two major tasks have to be undertaken: a heroic encounter with the unconscious and a committed relationship, in order for him to have the ordinary life he eventually seeks, though it's not likely he will ever be an ordinary person. Bolen calls out Zeus, Hermes, and Apollo as the archetypes most in need of development for the Dionysian. For example, speaking to Hermes, as the messenger god, Hermes easily traveled among the underworld, the earth, and the heights of Olympus. The ability to go from the depths to the heights without getting trapped emotionally is an ability that the Dionysian men need to cultivate. Hermes was also the communicator god. By learning to put his feelings into words and sharing them with others, a Dionysian man develops this aspect of Hermes. So I've got a few minutes here. I want to talk about Dionysus the man. Bolen has in her books like these mini biographies of a caricature of an archetype. Like we say Dionysus the man. What Bolen means is if there was an individual, and it could be a woman, this is just a hypothetical person who heavily identifies with Dionysus so that we can draw out his characteristics and analyze them and learn from them, right? So she says Bolen concedes that identifying a Dionysian person early in life can be challenging because the archetype is characterized by opposing tendencies and extremes. By mainstream standards, he is likely to be either too feminine, too mystical, too countercultural, too threatening, or too attractive and too fascinating for them to be comfortable with. Dionysus disrupts mundane life, not only calling others to revel, but by making a mundane life impossible or difficult for him to live. If there's a little boy, he may be labeled as acting like a girl because of being interested in what women are doing. Lack of parental approval is common for the Dionysus boy, who, by being himself, never seems to please his father. Attempting to be the son his father wants him to be with varied success is a typical experience. Ideally, the Dionysus will have a supportive father. Dionysus boys are often their mother's sons. They're more like their mother than their father in interests and personality. For those strongly identified with this archetype, adolescence is usually a crisis period involving various radical and experimental behaviors which can alarm the parents. He doesn't care about grades and indifference that increases as everything else intensifies. In terms of work and career, the Dionysian individual is not attracted to corporate culture, personal ambition, or even the academic world of ideas. Developing a skill that involves intensive study goes against his grain. Power and prestige also mean nothing to him. Many are found to be musicians, actors, or drug addicts. Or both, or all of the above. The Dionysian man is usually surrounded by women. The Dionysus man genuinely likes women, and from nursery school on, he probably has close female friends with whom he shares interests, confidences, and a depth of friendship that most men do not have with women. In his relationships with men, he is usually out of step. He's not at home in the locker room or the boardroom because male relationships in these settings are so impersonal and goal-related. Paradoxically, he may have closer male friendships than men who do fit in with their fellows. A number of male friends may be deeply important to him in different ways. With a Hermes friend, he reaches the conversational depths, and a Hephaestus friend finds that a Dionysus really appreciates what he creates, that he touches his works of art with the same reverence that Hephaestus felt when he made them. Apollo is also drawn to Dionysus who is his opposite. Bolen says that Dionysus was a god who could weep over a friend. Oh, I love this. I'm just going to pause for a second. Dionysus, I think I identify, I mean, I'll get to my reactions to him, but yeah, he's like, I mean, my childhood is filled with being friends with outsiders, people who didn't really fit in, or who had a great, like persona of fitting in, but then they could take off the mask with me, you know? Yeah, I'm especially sensitive to the Hephaestus-Dionysus relationship. I mentioned this in the Hephaestus video. Hephaestus, poor guy, he's so taken for granted. And Dionysus suddenly comes out of nowhere and is like, whoa, you made this? You're awesome, man. And Hephaestus is like the hunchback of Notre Dame, whittling away, thinking nobody gives a crap. And Dionysus finally validates all that effort, right? That's such a beautiful thing. And I also like the Dionysus dynamic. Apollo's like the good boy. Dionysus is like the troublemaker. Like, not the bad boy, but like the weirdo. That's the word. So it's like the skater goth guy being friends with the head quarterback or whatever. And I love like that they can have common ground, you know? Because Dionysus is such a force of nature. He's like just such a character. Like, if you're open to him and you can receive him, he is such a benefit, in my opinion. That was a rant. So, sexually speaking, conquests mean nothing to Dionysus. It's rather all about the experience itself. The expression of an innate, intense sexuality is an essential issue for Dionysus. In terms of marriage, traditional women do not consider him marriage material. He can't be counted on to be a breadwinner. Life will be unpredictable with him. Problems arise when women marry him and expect him to change into somebody else. In terms of children, a Dionysian man is often such a big kid himself. He's often hit with other people's children. He doesn't hit anybody. He's often a hit with other people's children. There can be problems, though, with his relationships to his own children, often being very charming but easily distracted and unreliable, which can be a real letdown. However, Dionysian men can often be deeply moved by the birthing moment. To such a degree, it awakens the urge to be a stay-at-home father and become drawn to the maternal duties. If a Dionysus individual can achieve some sort of stability despite his extreme nature, there you'll find one with depth and maturity who stays intense and integrates his ecstatic and creative moments into his life. I think of Joseph Campbell and Alan Watts in this category. A Dionysus's later years will be set up by what happens in his midlife. Perhaps he's still on a journey for stability and is just now settling in. Ideally, however, a highly individualized life of depth and meaning is attained. They can achieve an unmatched spiritual oneness whereby one is delighted with humanity and is perfectly ready to face death. So here's my reaction to Dionysus in the last few minutes here. TLDR, I heavily identify, like there are certain ways that I really identify with Dionysus and some other ways not. So Bolen talked about how Dionysian men have a natural interest in being around women and in feminine activities. For better or worse, I've always recognized this in myself. I have like in the Big Five personality test, I'm like 99% in openness. I am hugely open. So that might be the explanation for it. But I've always found girls and women fascinating. I always like talking to them because, you know, they're like an alien race in a way. And men to women in a way. And men and women live such different existences, especially these days. So communicating with them is usually interesting, even if just for that experience. And this is coming from somebody not heavily, but who was involved in the manosphere to a degree, which I have a video on. TLDR, I'm purple-pilled, by the way, for those who know about that. Sadly, and this is from my experience, I think women throughout my life have judged me in a way, judged me way harsher than I would ever judge them in terms of first impressions. I know there are evolutionary reasons for this. Women's experiences are ruled by fear of men to a certain extent, which is tragic, and it's kept me and probably others from associating with them. That being said, I've had several kinds of relationships with women, so at this point in my life, it's much less mysterious. On this note, I also want to say that this adds to the tragedy of where things between men and women have gone these days. I think men and women are great complements to one another and have a lot they can add to each other's lives. But right now, they kind of hate each other, at least if you're going to trust what's going on the internet. Everyone just wants hookups, it seems like. Intimacy is in short supply. And it's basically whoever cares the least wins kind of culture on both sides. Seems like a recipe for extinction, if you ask me. So Bolen says that Dionysians often look for the one in a series of partners, and this isn't me at all. I had a healthy upbringing and a caring mother. I took the PDS's, Personal Development School's attachment theory test, and I scored a 70. So I'm 70% secure, 20% anxiously attached, and 10% fearfully attached, and 0% dismissive avoidant. So I've got some issues in terms of like, I'm more of like a wanting to connect. I have like a 20% of my personality is like that. Like I get really enthusiastic at the beginning, like in the honeymoon period, and that can turn dismissive avoidant women off, that I might be clingy or needy or whatever. I'm just happy and I want to be with them, but they perceive it as being needy or something. So I have a streak of that. I would also say, in regards to Dionysus, I'm not prone to spontaneity. I have a spontaneous side and I have a risk-taking side, but it's definitely not my modus operandi. I don't party. I've never been drunk. I think I've been tipsy, but never drunk. I've never had a substance addiction. I drink a lot of Diet Coke, but that's about the extent of it. I have plenty of other struggles, but the Dionysian ones are not one of them. I will say that I identify with Dionysus in being out of step with other men. I think normal, like Zeus and Apollo men, regard me with pity or ambivalence. I definitely resonate with what Bolen says about no one being indifferent to me. That is so true for me. People either love me, it borders on worship. I'm not even bragging, but others hate me right away. I am a very polarizing individual, and honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. Yeah, I mean, I like being unique. I like being not just another dude, even though that puts me on the outsides. Another thing is, I already talked about the friendship of Dionysus and Hephaestus. Like Hephaestus has to put all his feelings and thoughts into his work to sublimate them, and doesn't feel it because no one will listen. No one takes him seriously. But with Dionysus, he can do that, and that's so valuable. Yeah, I resonate with the lifelong struggle to fit in. I've talked about before, but I'm kind of like, I have one foot in the door with like Magic the Gathering people, gamers, programmers, authors, screenwriters, musicians, YouTubers, and it's caused like an identity issue, right? Anyway, hope y'all got something out of it. I'm going to end it here. Let me know what y'all have in common with Dionysus We made it. I'll see y'all in the concluding videos. Have a good one. Bye-bye.